Welcome to the In Search of More podcast. I am your host, Eli Nash. Join me weekly on my quest for more from myself and more from this world. We'll see you on the other side. Welcome back, Rabbi Yochi.
Thank you, really.
I'm sitting here with Yochi Ress. For those who know him from a previous podcast, Yochi lives in South Africa, is a psychotherapist by training, a musician by passion, and a Facilitation Jew. Someone who's been involved with psychedelics before it became cool. Even though you're the one who made it cool.
So good to be back here. Thank you.
Yes, welcome back. Okay, so we had the opportunity to spend Rosh Hashanah together at the
House of More. I just realized we've spent 3 whole days, powerful days together, and didn't flesh out at all what we're going to speak about. And one of the many things I love about you is just your open heart and just being open to possibilities and in the moments and as authentic as can be.
Yes, I've planned my whole life for this moment. It wouldn't be appropriate to take a few minutes to plan for it, take away from it. Yes, but I think that's why the few people who listen, is they enjoy the, I think many people, that's the feedback I get. There could be other reasons, but the feedback I get is that people feel that it's a discussion that's real to us in the moment, to me and the other person in the moment. That's what we're trying to do. There's no specific agenda. There's no ads we have to run. There's no one we have to answer to, as far as I know. So as long as we feel good with ourselves at the end of the podcast, then we're good. So I think people enjoy that. Okay, so the last time you were here was approximately
a year and a few months ago.
Okay, so I'm sure a different audience, many people who are listening to this don't know you from that unless they went scrolling back to some previous episodes. So we'll consider it brand new, besides for the fact that you're probably brand new.
Just post Rosh Hashanah especially.
But I do always like to know what's happened as a result of the podcast, because in my life, the podcast is not it's not just a place where conversations happen and that's all. It interweaves and intersects with my life in beautiful and important ways. The guests that I meet at my podcast often come into my life, not too different than spending Rosh Hashanah with you. My brother, who was there for Rosh Hashanah, asked, where'd I meet Yochi? I said he was a podcast guest. I said, you know before? I said, no, I met him through the podcast. Yeah. Wow. So there's that. And then even people who I know, like Avi Wolf, I knew for many years, but his involvement with the House of More and him beginning to lead the shul, and his wife Leah beginning to lead the shul there, that came about in many ways as a result of the podcast we did. After the podcast, I sat and spoke with him about the idea, and we went back and forth. It felt right for both of us, and a community was born.
So the podcast is really a birthplace of seeds that literally flower into real relationships and manifest actual communities even.
Yes. What has it done in your life?
Well, what a question, and what a appropriate starting point to just acknowledge and be so grateful for the opportunity to have been on your podcast. And it was at a very formative time in many ways for me and my work, and a lot of different areas of my life and work coming together in the very unique way that I've been so blessed to have converge the main areas of psychology and music and the mystical side, and all within a healing context. So that first podcast was, I had made my first trip to the US in 40 years.
You came for the MDMA conference?
I came for the Psychedelic Science MAPS conference. That was my main driver. So I have been very blessed, and I'm still part of that core team of what's called adherence raters in the research with the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. It was a bit of a disappointing decision from the FDA recently.
Yeah, I wanted to speak about that.
To push back, and perhaps an important also, priority around safety, and essentially the stance was that they were not yet confidently convinced of the benefits outweighing the risks, and the safety aspects, not just safety on the actual medicine itself, but the interaction with therapists and clients, and when those boundaries are a lot more open and vulnerable and what can happen, and just really wanting more solid assurance that all of that is absolutely firmly in place. Of course, there's a lot of different ways to understand what's been happening and playing out in terms of dynamics and power systems and FDA approved oxycodone, so it's a complex whole field, it may mean some more work for me potentially as well as part of that research if there's further phases. So
let's. I want to make sure I understand it in plain English. So, MAPS submitted a trial to have MDMA acceptable for.
Yeah, this was the final stage of
So
of a number of phases.
Phase 2,
Phase 3 was even completed, and there was really a lot of hope and a lot of at the conference. Actually, I flash back to a nice psychedelic choice of word, to a very special evening on the Monday nights and the two pre-workshops days, Monday and Tuesday, before the actual main workshop conference started on the Wednesday.
This is last year, June,
and in Denver, Colorado. And the Monday night, I was part of a very, very special historical meeting of the entire MDMA research team in the trials, just honoring where things had reached and such an exciting point. At that stage, they were submitting what's called the NDA, the new drug application. So they'd finished all of the phases. They were confident that there's also another tricky complexity, which I can't really go into too much because it's so complex. But the company that was really running on the pharmaceutical wing of MAPS, called MAPS PBC, Public Benefit Corporation, they had a breakaway and went independent as now called Lycos Therapeutics. Lycos is one of the either Greek or Latin for wolf. I forget which language. So there has also been a complexity in terms of the submission was through the Lycos company, but just a very, very complicated whole process, and also in terms of the MAPS internal system as well, just kind of being able to really navigate a very, very complex multi-level system and process. And so the Monday night at the last year's conference in Denver was really a celebration of where things had gotten to and how exciting things have been, and seemingly so positive. And they were at the final stage of submitting this new drug application to the FDA, and then there was a response. I don't know if you saw there was a response from the FDA Advisory Committee. It was a separate body to the FDA and wasn't the ultimate decision lying with them, but nonetheless they had a very quite critical and concerned outlying a whole lot of responses. MAPS and Lycos did respond to that very thoroughly, and there was an opportunity as well to meet, and there was a lot of complexities and tricky aspects there as well. But at that stage, it was just a really beautiful moment to celebrate where things are.
And you're saying to go from that then to.
And then it's been kind of a roller coaster, because it was really, a lot of hopes and expectations were pinned on this application, and then we had a sense that it may be not favorable because of the FDA Advisory Committee's published kind of concerns. There was very solid response to that in terms of each one of the points and kind of giving context, and so it's now requiring more another phase, or at least of safety.
Okay, so it's not over.
So it's not over. Absolutely.
But had it gone through this last approval, it would have been done.
I mean, it would have been the green light to really then start the whole process of, but that would then have a whole nother phase of how we get therapists, and enough therapists, if it's becoming, mainstreamed and available on a mass level. There are already training programs which in many ways are gearing therapists to be able to be ready and trained and prepared for when that green light comes through. But that's also a significant,
But my
aspect in
understanding
terms
is
of the
that they've
process.
already been training therapists.
They
in this.
have been, and they are, and they're even around the world. MAPS is even, I was very blessed to. One of the things in the interim since the last podcast to share a very beautiful blessing that I was able to be part of is attending the Psychedelic Medicine conference in Israel at the end of July.
You're saying that was as a result of the podcast we did together?
So no, that was also just at that evening that I was saying now, the celebration in Denver, Colorado. I met
Right.
the head of Israel MAPS Israel, which is a separate, its own, but of course connected very strongly to MAPS, she's a really incredible human being and therapist. She's the lead clinical investigator in many of the trials, Dr. Karen Sarfati, and I met her and her partner Udo. Udo, really an amazing also human being. I have so much love for both of them at that evening, and she spoke as well. They spoke from the Israel research sites, side, and just their words of being part of it and contribution and gratitude, very beautifully articulated. And then at that evening, Karen spoke about the upcoming conference in Israel that she was hosting and suggested that maybe I look into that and apply for that. And so
cool.
I did that, and it's I didn't know if it would manifest. A lot going on in Israel, and it was a very special blessing because our daughter is also studying in Israel for the year after school. She's almost 19 next month, and I was able to spend 2 Shabbos with her. It was very beautiful. But that was a very, very intense time as well, and what was going on. They actually, at the end of the conference, it was from the 28th of July till the 1st of August, that was when they took out Nasriel, Khania, Ismail Khania was taken out at that time. It was a very, very intense build-up.
Just a couple months ago.
Yeah. And it was quite eerie in many ways because as the kind of this healing conference there were so many efforts to try and block and prevent from happening and thwart. A lot of boycotting. The conference was very, very small for an international conference. It was 200-something people. In Denver, Colorado, it was 12,000. Okay, that was the main MAPS event as well. But there was a lot that was looking to not have that conference happen. And what was quite amazing is that Rick Dublin came out for that conference. And Rick
what were the reasons not to?
well, the whole politics with Israel and the liberal community of which many are involved in, also psychedelic space and research space, and it was very much tainted so much by the politics, and unfortunately that affected a lot of attendance and people did pull out and organizations pulled out. But it was a very special conference. It was there were some amazing people and world leading experts there. It was a very special, heartfelt.
I wasn't following on the opposition. Who would oppose?
Well, because it was Israel and happening in Israel and organized by MAPS Israel with.
So the boycotts that exist, not inside Israel, outside. Israel,
outside of Israel. From the international point of view.
Okay, kind of like the BDS movement and things like that.
Correct.
What's the legal status of MDMA in Israel?
MDMA in Israel, to my knowledge, is still strictly scheduled as an illegal substance, or it has not gone through a full vetting and legalized substance. But I believe that given the levels of trauma and that they've been experiencing, and in the wake of post-October 7, the government has understood the role that these medicines can play and has supported, to my knowledge, and allowed healers and these kinds of healing. In fact, what was presented at the conference as well, it was held at the Dan Panorama Hotel in Tel Aviv Yafo, was actually some of the research and data around new protocol developed in terms of structure for group MDMA therapy post-October trauma sufferers. And because of the scale and the level of the trauma, they had to develop and fast-track developing new protocols in group formats, which was not done before in the research. And they were just sharing some of what came out of that. And one of the very interesting findings is that having the group format allowed for a sense of community and support in the integration post sessions work and phase, which was really, really valuable. And it was just an interesting. I have a very big interest in exploring how post-psychedelic work and any related transpersonal, deep somatic work like breath work, etc., can be better integrated in a group format in a way where there's a kind of a living sort of community and circle of people that support each other in that integration. My sense is that it would be a lot more powerful and effective to use that kind of...
Do you mean working with the MDMA in a group or after?
Well,
the
actually,
individual?
I'm talking now about just even individuals and or groups, but really kind of exploring how much more valuable people can be supported in that integration work and not feel as alone or isolated in doing that. The
Right.
journey is a very personal journey, but there's something very magical and special about the community group space that I think is so powerful.
In an informal capacity or formal capacity?
That's what I'm also just considering and thinking about what different models could there be, and I think that there's a gap there. I think that perhaps there could be some formalized, and that could be explored. But I think that we are finding out more and more, and I think this was something that for me was really powerful in the last 3 really life-changing days spent in this really unique special Rosh Hashanah service at your House of More, Minyan. But the community and the role of community and the magic of a circle that's a container, we call it, that's really tightly held together by shared vision and intention and open hearts and courage. It's just so powerful. We're discovering in research more and more around the social factor. That Harvard study that came out where the single most important factor when they tracked in this landmark study of over 80 years or something, that's the most important element in life to have an enriched and happy, fulfilled life is quality connection relationships.
The quality of relationships.
And good, not the amount necessarily, but the space of being able to really be held and hold each other. And it's not so much about self-regulating anymore. It's now more co-regulating. And how can we reach out and how can we be vulnerable? And when we reach out and we open up and we share with courage, the amazing thing and paradox is that, and this came through in the last few days as well, I felt, is that we realized that actually we're not so alone, and others are having such similar, even if it's not in the same way, but similar struggles in their humanity as we're having with our humanity and this crazy journey of life that's with all its twists and turns. And it's just a beautiful, nourishing thing to have that, to not travel it as alone. On some level, our journey in life is a personal solo journey. No one else can do that journey for us except ourselves. Interesting that Richard Schwartz, new developer of IFS book on relationships, is so geniusly titled, "You Are the One You've Been Waiting For."
Right.
And really kind of captures that truth. But when we stay true to our own journey in the context and presence of others in a meaningful, deep, held and sacred way, that is, I think that's the ultimate blessing.
I had a guest on this podcast, Michael DeSanti, and in speaking with him one time after that podcast, I've got to know him. He leads sweat lodges. Every once in a while he does retreats at the House of More. He shared with me this idea that we all assume that our problems are unique and our gifts are very common. And as part of the healing, we realize the reverse is true. That our problems fit into one of 5, 6, or 7 buckets that many other people have, be it financial, be it relationship, be it health, be it, some emotional overwhelm. There's a few buckets that things fall into. During it, we feel very, very, very overwhelmed, very, very unique in the process. Right. And then he says that our gifts, because they're so common to us, we assume that it's common to everyone else. Whether it's a perspective we have on the world or whether it's something we're capable of doing, we think it's commonplace and we don't value it as much as we could or should. Powerful perspective. There was one journey that I was part of attending as a group of very close friends, and I actually mentioned them in the first podcast, and I was so struck by, this was a group of really
powerful people, really people who are actualizing their lives in a beautiful way, kindred spirits, real, authentic, living with heart people. And in the beginning, and just checking in with our intentions, and it was just striking how every single person had something around wanting to feel more comfortable within my skin, and just something around my sense of self and sense of self in the world. And it was just a moment where there was this collective realization and appreciation of how, someone articulated it in the space and said, all of you are absolutely incredible human beings, shining so much light and beauty into the world. And yet, we all see it in each other, but we struggle seeing it in ourselves. And it's this deepest aspect of our sense of self in the world, and just being able to really feel aligned with that in the deepest way.
Yeah, there's this...
You model that for me in a really inspirational way.
Meaning?
That I see you and experience you as someone who's just done so much work on themselves, and who lives with such a truth and passion and integration that you hold that very well.
Thanks. Appreciate that. There's a book that I've quoted a few times recently on the podcast called Letters for Life by Levi Shmutkin. And he did a great job kind of laying out the Rebbe's perspective on mental health and pulling it from letters, but not writing in the language of letters, putting in his own words and his own structure and understanding. And in it, he shared something, I think it was from a Gemara, maybe you know it, that a person is not trusted to incriminate themselves. In Jewish law, unlike others, for example, U.S. law, United States law, if someone confesses to a sin, then that's the greatest evidence of their guilt. In Jewish law, it doesn't work like that. In Jewish law, someone can't testify against themselves. They're not trusted. And he explained in there, and based on some Rebbe letters, as I recall, that the reason is that we're not actually honest about ourselves. Not in the positive always, sometimes in the negative, that we're too hard on ourselves. We can incriminate ourselves when we don't deserve the incrimination. And Jewish law recognizes that as a reality. Wow. And therefore we don't trust ourselves to say, okay, we did X or we did Y, we did this sin or that sin, and therefore are deserving of a certain punishment. It has to come from two other witnesses in order to establish that guilt.
Wow. It brings to mind a beautiful teaching I once heard around why do we also burn the candle that we use to search for chametz on the eve of Pesach with everything else. Like, it's kind of like, why burn that and include that?
Right.
And one of the Hasidic explanations is that the candle represents inspecting and looking for negativity and a very critical sort of lens. And there's a place for that. But there's also a place where that needs to really be recognized within a much more important and greater self-value. And it's just a nice teaching.
Right. The critical eye, so to speak.
Yeah.
I saw it recently. There's this organization that posts videos of the Rebbe, and there was someone coming by, I think, who mentioned problems with his eyes, and the Rebbe, or it was talking about himself or someone else who was having eye problems, and the Rebbe connected it to having a positive view of others, like having a good eye in tova, like seeing the good in others, and sometimes being too judgmental is not a positive. Not sometimes, more than sometimes. I thought a lot about that over Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur because it was a very not Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, because it was very inspiring. The Rosh Hashanah and Shabbos, the davening and what we had there, and it was very much a patched together minyan. We had 12 guys, and at different times, you had 9 and then 10, and so everyone needed to be there, but at the same point in time, not everyone completely felt the mold, matched the mold. Not everyone there completely matched the mold of what one would expect from a typical minyan. And I think as a result of that, it actually worked out where there wasn't any room to judge because everyone was essential to the minyan. So that was out, and I think everyone felt quite comfortable being there. They understood that, okay, if you want me to be here for 6 hours, there's an element of it that I'm going to stay in my uniqueness, And I know you don't want me to leave because I'm
You can't do this without me.
leader of the Minyan. And I think it was beautiful. And I saw how healing it was for some of the guys who were in there, including myself, to the room to be ourselves in the space and to see how it actually created a higher
Communal
state.
connection.
Yes, higher state, a higher connection, and a more intense prayer, I believe. It was very moving.
It was one of the highlight prayer services of my life. Yeah, just a really special, something really magical and nourishing when people can hold space for each other, when people can have that openness to really allow each person's soul and unique soul to shine in its own unique way, and to appreciate that and hold that together. There's a beauty. That's the divine space.
Right.
That is the divine space is a space of unity and shalom in the sense of fullness. Shalem is what the word means. Yes. It's like the infinite one. The Ein Sof is big enough where there can be so many different expressions and they can all be true and right. And that's really and it did feel like really at various moments in particular that there was a divine presence resting. People articulated that. People mentioned that it was as if the Shekhinah was with us. And I think that's just such an important blueprint for our time in Jewish history and where we are. There are so many Jews in my work and in just paying attention to where people are at and where the future of our Jewish consciousness needs to be and leadership. And this is a time where we have to realize the most important principles, and that is unity and inclusivity and diversity and heart, more than mind and head. And this is what's going to really bring in my mind and heart the Gula, the redemption. This is what is needed. And it was such a miniature, it was a microcosm, as small as it was, this minyan, but in the quality and in the beauty of what unfolded and just manifested from the just pure shared intention and connection and presence of everyone was something really not only healing, but for me, it was something of a messianic quality. It was something that reflects where actually we should all be going in some way as a Jewish world.
Yeah, it felt like a true diversity. I saw recently that, one of the reasons Tiferes is beauty is because it's combining two opposites, right? There's one color can't be beautiful.
Right.
As wonderful as the color is,
Right.
if it's just one color,
Right.
it can't earn the name beauty.
Right.
Or the description beauty. Whereas when you have two, Chesed and Gevurah, now you have something that has the potential to create Tiferes,
Right.
to create a beauty, because there's a combination of colors. Same with music, right?
Absolutely.
One note doesn't create a beautiful song. You need a few played together.
Absolutely.
Yes. And I guess harmony also, right? Harmony also suggests
and that's
more
the
than one.
Jewish signature. I mean, Bnei Israel, and Israel was Yaakov, that convergence of the two opposing energies and harmonizing them, of Avram and Yitzchak, and kindness and Chesed and Gevurah. It's really embedded in our DNA, and Tiferet is, we have a daughter, Tiferet, as well. It's my second name is Shalom, but it's such a core. It's really the basis of the whole system of Kabbalah, the whole framework of just interflow between different energies and fullness and completion and integration. Not just horizontally. Usually it's seen as the three lines, the male, the female, and in the middle, but also vertically to the three energy centers of mind energies, the mochin, heart energies, the midot, and body, gut, the nahim. And it's just living in harmony is really what it's all about. Deceptively simple.
You have to get a lot of stuff out of the way to get to that space. Yeah. So I want to put a bow on one topic we brought up and then go into something else which is on my mind. So from the last podcast we did, my understanding is that you began working with a lot of US-based clients.
Yeah.
Like, as a result, a number of people reached out, and you're working with people in the U.S.
Consulting people in the space and helping with preparation, integration.
Beautiful.
Yeah, really just trying to assist in these deep processes and deep work with providing, the difficulty and the challenge with this really exciting space in many ways is that it is exciting and it's powerful tools and there's so much need for it, but it's happening so quickly,
Right.
and with such force and speed that the quality of the experience and the process, which is not just the actual journey in whatever format that takes, but it's the container of that journey. So like the journey is like the orot in Kabbalah language, the lights and the energy that comes through, and it's often tremendous and very condensed energy, so much so that it can feel like it's going to take weeks, months to years sometimes to unpack this. And then, but what you do with all that light, it will naturally stay for a while. There'll be a natural afterglow, but it will just close up if it isn't integrated and embedded and anchored. And so the container for that, and what you call in Kabbalah language, literally the kli, literally container, the kalim, the vessels, is the process and the journey in the broader timescale of the preparation and the intention, and especially the integration and the working afterwards to translate whatever came through into real, meaningful, even small, and especially small, because if it's too big, it won't be integrated and real, right. But consistent shifts in one's day-to-day life and interaction with people in your life, or your work, or what you're doing in the world. So I really believe that there's a big gap in that. There's so much experiences, journeys happening and facilitating, but not so many facilitators really focusing and working on the preparation and the integration, right. In a very, very focused, solid way, from even having the integration in mind from the beginning. And so that's something that I feel is so important, and I feel that I have an ability to help people with, both from the psychological training experience and frameworks and tools, as well as in a Jewish context as well. And why not integrate this work with our spiritual practice in a meaningful, wholesome way.
And you've also been involved with it for a lot longer. You're an elder in many ways.
Yeah, I was an early adopter, I guess.
Yes. in this regard.
Even in South Africa, it was. I was blessed to come across ayahuasca 12 years ago. I'd heard about it. I was interested in it. At that stage, I'd had a handful of just my own psilocybin experiences. Heard about this ayahuasca. People just kept describing it in the most intense and difficult, and I was intrigued, but I was terrified. And I was like, maybe when I was 70, but like not at this point in my life. It sounds too like hectic. And then I met through the Mankind Project, which I was telling you a little bit about. I met someone who, a non-Jewish guy, a colleague, someone quite a bit older than me, and a real mentor figure in my life, who I really respected and looked up to. Someone who was really integrated and really, and we got chatting and speaking, and this topic came up, and he shared with me that he's working with the medicine. And I was amazed to just meet someone who I knew, who I trusted, and I just asked him, tell me about it. What's it been like, and is it safe? And he said, his words were to the effect along the lines of, it's the most powerful tool in transformation and healing in my 30 years of work in this space that I've come across by far. And he said, if you do it in the right way with an experienced healer, it's totally safe. And when I heard that, I was like, okay, this is something I really would love to do and experience. And one of the most difficult experiences of my life, especially the one ceremony, which I count as this is the most formative ceremony, sort of the level of impact and gravitas that I see my life as in many ways until that point and since that point. That was the introduction into actually using these tools in a very contained way, because the shamanic model is to do it with a very respectful, sacred preparation, and using it as a tool. And So I'm very grateful that's my own experience started with that medicine and in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, certainly from the questions I get from people and comments, those entering it or haven't entered it yet, curious about it, often misunderstand it in the sense of that it's, okay, here's something that should cure everything or could cure everything. And of course, nothing is a panacea. It doesn't work like that, but it certainly opens up the possibility for a lot to be healed. Like I know one individual who had a journey and he felt it was very powerful, but then was surprised that some things were slipping back afterwards. And he's like, well, how many times am I going to have to do it? I said, we wouldn't ask that about other things. How many times would you have to go to the gym, or how many times would you have to go to therapy? Or, right? We would recognize that there's an application that we have to apply ourselves to a certain level. And over time, if we see benefit, it was worth it. It doesn't have to be a one and done experience in order to make it worthwhile. I'm glad there's high expectations, but right, we also have to temper it with the reality.
It's our culture's also our culture's very immediate gratification, in many ways as well, and quick, so fast, and but it's so fundamental for me. Probably one of the most fundamental aspects of this work is that it's just a tool still, and the work is the work. Yeah, the work is lifelong. And,
the work is really here. It's not there.
Yeah, the true work is afterwards.
Correct. Yeah, I haven't had an ayahuasca experience in a year and a half. I haven't had a psilocybin experience, and I think even longer than that. I've worked with some other medicines, but not those specifically, and not ones that have that very
ego dissolving
state. And not that I won't go back, or I'm sure I will at some point if it feels right.
If it's a calling, that's the way a lot of people describe it, is they go into the space if they feel called to explore something, work on something, not just stum.
Right. Yeah. Now, before going in, I say I want to work out as many things outside of that space. Kind of the worst thing. The worst thing is to have stuff left over. I mean, there's always things to work on, but especially if something is sticky and something that the message has come through a few times on, to have to go back there to get it again, I've found could be very painful and uncomfortable.
Cleaner sort of line to just have insights, and if you've already done pre-work, to kind of get to more of a
a repeated message, right? If there's a repeated message that keeps coming through, it doesn't come through in exactly the same way. It comes through a little bit more intense in a little bit different way, saying, okay, maybe we'll get it this time, maybe we'll get it this time. And I found medicine in a very uncomfortable place to work through repeated messages. So if I can, I'd prefer not to work it out there. I prefer to work it out in this dimension at a certain pace, and for everything to be crammed into, several hours.
Right.
So, I think that needs to be understood. For me, I was having a good amount of experiences in a short period of time, and after a certain amount, I said, okay, now it's time for me to practice what it is I've learned in that space and put it into real life. And there are also so many tools that it gives us to be able to access higher states through other methodologies, whether it's through meditation or just some time alone.
Movement
breath.
for me has been breath.
Breath has changed for me completely since beginning to work with psychedelics, because I didn't understand that those states were real or possible before. And now so if accessing it through breath didn't seem possible to me before, I didn't understand what anyone was talking about. And I don't know that I could have broken through. But once I broke through with psychedelics, then those pathways became much more
So it's interesting because my order was reversed. I started with the psychedelics, then experienced breath work, and was astonished at how similar the space was. So perhaps, as you say, because I had broken through some of those pathways, it was just so easily present and accessible in the breath work.
No, and I've certainly heard of people who
started.
Yeah, who were able to. And I had several breathwork experiences before, and none of them had those breakthrough. I had relaxation and I had some clarity, but I didn't have those transcendent states.
Transpersonal.
Right. Right. Those came afterwards. I'm not saying it wasn't possible, or it is. I know many people who have had it for the first time on breath. But anyway, we have different protectors and different, different size and thickness of walls. So some of us need more.
That's also something which I've realized in some ways, because when it comes to the frequency of doing these sessions, there's no formulas. It's a decision that every person has to ask and honestly answer themselves. Have they applied enough of and worked with enough of what came through the previous time before they jumping in again. For some, that could be once, twice a year. For others, it could be once every 2 months, 3 months. But I've also realized and appreciated more recently that everyone's walls and defenses and psyche structure is different, and sometimes those barriers are so thick, and there's been so much trauma, and not only the big T traumas, but sometimes the more insidious and more impactful, constant, small T traumas that a person has grown up their whole childhood with and beyond. And there's a rationale perhaps to for such people for a certain period of time perhaps to have perhaps a bit more frequency relative, but I still believe that it's absolutely critical to have that work in between and to honor that.
Yes.
Really.
It is. There's no question. It's where the real work happens is here.
Yeah.
And it's where the rubber meets the road is.
Absolutely.
Absolutely on this dimension. So one thing we were speaking about over Rosh Hashanah was your experience with groups. So I didn't recognize that the last time we spoke. It also wasn't as important to me at the time because I didn't have the experience like I have now with Adama and seeing the power of healing that comes in a group and what's possible in a group. And
group is a magical space.
Yeah. I mean, we had that over Rosh Hashanah with one individual who, a process kind of emerged, and I said, hey, if this was Adama, and he actually had wanted to come to Adama at some point, and it didn't. He came to a one day. He wanted to come to a Adama weekend, and it didn't work out. So I said, if we were, then this is what we would do at this moment. Right? If there was this point in a conversation, it's what we would do. And we went into a very, a group process where he sat in the middle and the group around, and different people offering different ideas. But a lot of it wasn't even ideas as much as presence. Presence and compassion and care and feeling that from a group. It's much more than one person can give. Being able to look around and there's 10 faces all looking back and saying, we got you, we support you, we care about you, we don't know you, and we don't even care about the details of your story. We're not even going to remember that. Like, it's not what we're focused on. What we're focused on is you as an individual, right. And you clearly need something, and we've been there before. We've needed that too. The
individual knows that each person standing around them has been there and done something of that type of.
Yeah. What I mean, we don't care about the details of the story is that oftentimes someone is worried about, if I share this detail of my story, I'm going to offend my father, I'm going to offend my mother. No one's going to remember that detail. No one cares about that. And it was
beyond words in any case.
Yeah, exactly. It's nothing. That's what I'm saying. No one cares about those details. No one's focused on that. It's just seeing a human being suffering. And for a lot of us who's been in that place, I think a lot of the motivation to keep doing this work is say, well, like, why should humans suffer? If we can alleviate some of human suffering. And sometimes the suffering is so big, but it's actually so small in the sense that the presence of it is all consuming.
Right.
But what's holding it up, it's standing on a twig, on nothing, right? Like in that moment, there was nothing needed to, just incinerate whatever was holding up all of this worldview that created the suffering for this individual. And the same is true with many of us. Often what I speak about is secrets, for example, and how that decision we make to not share something with anybody in the world creates a mountain of suffering that we're walking through.
It blocks us. Actually, we were speaking about it. It dawned on me in a very new way, the whole principle of annulling vows, and before Rosh Hashanah, and we do it again Yom Kippur. Kol Nidre starts the whole day with that prayer, and this concept of what is the vows, and it's kind of like the trauma and hurts that we go through in life. And we make promises that we will never love again because we're so hurt, and that we will close ourselves up, and we take on this thing in such a massive way, as you're saying, and it just bounds us, and it just holds us so hostage to anything in life in many ways, and to so much we get limited by, and affects on such a systemic global level. And it was a beautiful thing to witness that process where the group just held so much love and courage and authenticity and invitation and heart and non-judgment that this person was able to, we could sense and just see this vow just going away and just opening and leaving and receding. And as you also mentioned to me, the person looked like a completely different person afterwards. Just you could see in his body, his whole being, such a powerful transformation, such a release. Power of a group is never to be underestimated.
Yes, very, very powerful. I do want to talk about your experience, but I feel it would help to bring a specific example. Like, what do I mean that someone could be sitting in a sea of suffering that's held up by nothing? So one theme, I guess, that I've been hearing about a lot in the last few months are, adults today with families, with children who, as teenagers in yeshiva, say, had a sexual experience with someone of the same sex. And those few experiences, or even if it was more than a few experiences, could weigh on this person for decades, for decades and decades and decades. What does it say about them? Who does it mean they really are? What kind of fraud they are? What if their wife knew? What if the community knew? Right? Who knows? Right? All of the many, many different thoughts that could pollute someone's existence on this planet, simply because they were unwilling to share that with someone else. And wasn't so recently, but a little while ago, in a group, someone shared that, and that how that was weighing on them. That as a teenager, they had a sexual experience with someone of the same sex, and how it weighed on them, and they hadn't told their wife, and just the secret, and if people knew, the lack of acceptance, and all of those things. And
how much power that holds.
Yeah, and how much power that held over him. We saw it in the moment. And someone else shared, me too. And very quickly, I went around the room in a circle of, 10 men, and 4 or 5 acknowledged that in yeshiva they had those, many of us were in yeshiva, had similar experiences. And I was like, so what? Are we going to sit there for the next 30, 40, 50 years suffering because of this reality, when often all that's needed is not even to sit there and dig to the bottom of it and understand more. It's just to talk about it.
Just to express it.
Yeah, just to express it. And there was powerful healing in that moment.
In the right space where it can be held.
Where it could be, where it's expressed and accepted, right? That's very important, because we're opening something up. And when we open something up, in that space of being open, are we inviting love? Are we inviting judgment or criticism or hate? Or, that's very important. I'm not just saying speak about it, absolutely. But seeing how something so minuscule on the one hand could create so much suffering in a person's world on the other. And I don't think that there was any one-on-one interaction that could have provided the relief for this specific individual. There wasn't one person they could have spoken to and shared this with, and they would have felt the love, acceptance, understanding, compassion for, not only for the experience, but for the many years of suffering afterwards, the suffering and silence afterwards, for what ensued as a result of their choice, or not choice, the choice that was put on them to be silent.
If you think of all the context and layers of where the person was in their life, and the systems, and what was going on in the family and in the yeshiva system, and it's such to judge it just as the person's weakness, faults,
Right, so I'm saying it wasn't even a choice.
It's just,
It wasn't a choice. It was being in a reality where it could have been, it most likely was most dangerous to share it. Yeah. I'm not advocating people sharing
when it's risky
other secrets, right? I'm advocating spaces being created where we could hold that with each other, right? It's one of the main things we try to do at Adama is to create a space where we all agree to be fully accepting of the human experience. And then we find out about the human experience. But first we have to create the the parameters.
Hold that intention.
Yes. We are accepting of the human experience right here. Those are the rules. And we understand that within the human experience, sometimes it gets messy. And sometimes it gets messy. And this is not even a good example of messy. Most of this is messy in the head. But sometimes an individual hurts another person or whatever it is, right? We make massive mistakes or there's tremendous shame. And could we hold that in this space? Oftentimes someone just needs to be held in the confusion of something, not even the experience, just I'm very confused about something, and we can sit there all with whatever that confusion is. And so, like, we can handle confusion here, whatever it is. To have those spaces, I think, are so essential. It's what meetings, in many ways, recovery meetings gave to me, was a space that I can come and talk about everything in the world except for my psychedelic experiences. Anyway,
I heard somewhere that there was a subgroup or organization of one of the A's, or I'm not sure if so, a few of them that was looking to integrate. I mean, the funny thing is that one of the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous actually himself had very powerful LSD experiences, and it was quite formative in some ways of his vision and connected. Even
more than that, one of the original, I think they call him AA number 3, because the first were Bill W. and Dr. Bob. Those were the first two. The third, I forget his name. I would remember it if I heard it, but he had an experience at the time called the belladonna treatment, which was a psychedelic treatment of sorts.
Some shamanic tribes use belladonna. It's an
altered state of consciousness. I'm not familiar with it at all. But as part of his experience and his subsequent revelations during it, and in talking with Bill W. and Dr. Bob, AA was formed. So not only, it's more known about the
Bill
W. in his 60s, 30 years after AA was founded, that he came to LSD, and he wanted to bring it back to the groups, but they treated it as a relapse for the most part. And, it wasn't well accepted, and AA was much bigger than he was at the time. But what's less spoken about is the fact that
number 3.
Yeah, it was AA number 3 who had a belladonna treatment. Wow. That was very formative in the creation of 12 steps. But okay, be that as it may, I wanted to talk about your specific experience, because I didn't know about it last time, like I said, and we touched on it a little bit, but talk about your group healing experience specifically.
Thanks for asking about that. It's a very big enrichment that I was blessed to have in my career, specifically working as a corporate facilitator. I was hired and trained by one of the big banks in South Africa, Nedbank, to be part of their flagship leadership and culture transformation development workshops for teams, for senior leadership teams and middle management teams as well. And essentially, it was a dream job. I mean, often I think back to it and I wonder about it. Colleagues say, like, how did you ever get something like that? It was a full-time position for 4 years that I was trained in this methodology, and the job consisted of we would take different teams, management teams throughout the bank, throughout the 3 different main geographical cities in South Africa, Johannesburg, Cape Town, and Durban. And we would take them on a 3-day stay away, 2 nights as well. Different venues, nice, beautiful venues with a natural setting as well, and landscape. Often when you're doing deep process work in groups as well, having the right setting and openness and the landscape sort of environment is an important factor as well. And just getting out of the usual sort of workspaces and city frequency, if you could say.
The House of More fits that.
Oh yeah. This is like in the Miami tropical jungle healing house. Beautiful. So such an amazing space over here. A treat to spend Rosh Hashanah here. And really, these workshops were incredibly designed by an organization called the Center for Conscious Leadership. They were developed with a very, very powerful structure of 3 different days, where the first day was a focus on myself and personal mastery and frameworks of mindfulness and what are my triggers and things like that. The second day is moving into a more interpersonal space around feedback and clearing processes and storytelling, and really kind of connecting on a very, very deep level, very specifically and powerfully done and engineered. and forming at the end a really, really powerful container where a lot of healing and shifts happen. And the third day was more taking towards actually an integration point of like, well, having a team discussion around based on all of the experiences that we've had. And insights and shifts and learnings. What do we together as a team want to talk about? What needs to be spoken about? What are the unspoken? What are the elephants in the room? That's still the really hard conversations that everyone may know are sitting there, whether it's work related, whether it's more personal levels or combination. Have that conversation, and out of that, which is a very powerful and intense conversation and needs really solid facilitation, pull from that a kind of manifesto of, well, what do we want to agree to do differently as a team going forward?
So
and carry that back into the workplace.
So specifically people who work closely together.
So natural teams, yeah. What they did explore, which was interesting, was to get access to more people in the organization when they wanted to roll that out to a greater number. Being on this culture transformation journey, was they wanted to see if they could do it with non-intact teams and a much larger group. I was actually involved in actually helping to develop and design that larger group format process. And there were various advantages there to meet new people in the organization, cross teams, and leveraging networks and all of that. But what you lack there is the depth that you already have in a natural intact team that comes in, and then you do a process like that. So what we actually did, one of the main things that we did for that group process was that we actually engineered smaller home groups of smaller people, which would meet at regular points during the 3-day workshop, and that would really accommodate and provide extra depth in those small groups, which would in some ways make up for.
And was it usually a one and done, or was something that people came back, say, every year to?
So it was usually a once-off because it was a rollout program. There was another type of workshop which was a more specific, customized if the team is really needing something specific on a certain a merger or a conflict scenario, and there were those as well. But this was part of a rollout flagship project of the bank. And getting back to the training that I received, and that which talks a little bit more to your question of my group experience or training as a group specialist facilitator. We were trained, it was an incredible gift to be trained in this incredible framework methodology of group work and group facilitation called Deep Democracy, or another name is process work or process-oriented psychology. And it's also known as world work. There's a number of names because the understanding is that when we do our own personal and or group work, it's healing the world as well. Every level and scale of healing, and it does start inside out. And we can't, just go to the macro. We have to start from within and then let that ripple outwards. This is absolutely. It's a astonishingly powerful framework of work, of research. It's been developed over more than 4 decades, developed by a guy called Arnold Mindell. He was actually scholar at residence at Esalen Institute, so with Stan Groff, who developed holotropic breathwork. He was also scholar of residence there for a long time. And originally his work was in body work. He was working with individuals, and he was working with this concept called the dream body. And he was a Jungian analyst and a physicist at MIT, actually. And so he basically fused the Jungian concept of the shadow, what we're not aware of, and we don't express in our psyche and in our energy, and the concept of, in quantum physics, the field and what sits in the field and the possibilities that have not been explored and that can collapse into the moment. And he also brought and integrated shamanism actually as well. One of his books is on shamanism as a model. He saw the role of the shaman and a group facilitator as a midwife, as someone whose role is to help give birth to the voices that are not expressed in the space, in people individually, if they're doing a healing ceremony for individuals, but in a group or in a group process. He saw the role of the facilitator to really be able to follow the subtle hints and signals of something that's developing in the group. That's a process that everyone is involved in but may not realize, but one person in the group may be holding that role on behalf of the whole group. He spoke a lot about roles and different voices in the group. Very interesting parallel with Richard Schwartz's IFS. But having started on an individual ecology, so really working with understanding what lives inside of us, the different voices, what is the minority voice that's not expressed. So the name Deep Democracy, one of the names, is in contradistinction to normal democracy, where it's the majority voice is always favored. Deep democracy implies that all voices have wisdom. And not only that, but the minority voice, the voice that is most marginalized and squashed in any system, has the greatest wisdom to teach. And that's borne out in research with Susan Cain on introverts and how, in a more extrovert-dominated world, there's such a power there. It can be seen in many ways. It can be seen in the leadership being so patriarchally dominated, and that was the strong voice for so long, and the minority voice was the more feminine qualities. And now what is coming up in research is all the most critical elements for dynamic leadership. It's authenticity, vulnerability, intuition. Right. It's like that, which is very interesting when we look at the kind of parallel with a Jewish history point of view, from a Mashiach point of view, where Mashiach in a Kabbalah terminology and even in more explicit sources, in exoteric sources, is really seen as a switching of polarities and a supersedence of the feminine principle, which is, until that point, and as we are working towards that point, we're trying to bring out the malchut and the feminine principle, the sacred feminine in us, and we all, as male and female, have a masculine and feminine parts. But until that point, the historically, the feminine has kind of been receiving from the masculine, and Mashiach is really seen as a switch of that and a flip, where the feminine principle is going to actually be the ultimate and the dominant one. And it's interesting to see that in leadership, and it's also interesting to see that in some ways in the gender, aspects and dynamics, and that's also quite prominent, and it's very present, and the confusion around that.
The confusion you're connecting to what?
In terms of gender
right.
identification, and kind of to see it on a macro level. That as there's a switch in these kind of masculine and feminine principles,
right? There's an energy
it kind of brings with it, as part of that, some kind of confusion around that, and people are moving through processes around the aspects of their masculinity and femininity that they contain within, that we all contain within ourselves. And this is a very Kabbalistic principle, the power of the minority voice. It's embedded everywhere. Hashem says, Lo merubchem, not because of your loudness, your greatness, your multitude. Do I desire you, I love you, but ki atem ma'at mikol hamim, you are the smallest amongst all nations. And we know the disproportionate influence of the Jewish nation and impact in the world historically. And today, there's so much fuss made, over us and about us, and we have this really powerful voice, even though we are such a small amount in the bigger picture. And this is a very powerful principle to work with in a group process, to really start to listen. I mentioned on Rosh Hashanah that in the height of our prayers, that when the Tanya took a famous prayer, very moving story behind it. Rav Amnon of Mainz, I believe, we say that when called the Mama Daka, this faint, thin voice. It's a beautiful passage in the Prophets which speaks about, again, Hashem says, Lo barash, not in the noise, not in the fire, not in the mountains and the winds, but where's God to be found? Where's the divine called the Mama Daka, in the quiet and the understated? The sensitivity that is really, and that's what a Jew is. A Jew as Yehudi is Hod, which is that acknowledgement and sensitivity and openness, and Modeh that we spoke in the last podcast, but really it's our identity. Modeh isn't just I thank, otherwise it would be Ani Modeh, the grammar would be the reverse, but Modeh is saying that a Yehudi, a Modeh, a thanker, Ani is that's who I am. So, and what does it mean to thank? It really means to be awake. You cannot acknowledge anything, any other, a beautiful sunset piece of music, a loved one, if you aren't open to the other and present and awake. You have to be awake to do that. So as we awaken in our first moment of consciousness, we frame our day as a Jew, that being a Jew is about being awake. And that's in groups, that's really important as a facilitator. You really have to follow what's happening on the subtle levels. What is being sparked, what is ready to pop. And you did that, I told you, in such a most beautiful, amazingly skilled way with that process that we were referring to earlier. You just followed that signal, and you have to use your intuition very much as a facilitator. A group facilitator requires a strong level of connection with and access to your intuition and trusting that, because you're working on what Arnold Mandel calls the signals they faint, they're subtle. And just like as a human being, our minority voice, I was speaking in Kabbalah, the harmony on a vertical axis. We live in the attic of our being often, just stuck in our head, and we don't even access and inhabit our heart's center of intelligence and wisdom and our gut. The minority voice, in many ways, even more you could say than emotions, is our body. What are the signals that our body gives? I told you that line over Yontif, which seemed to resonate. The body reveals what the heart feels, but what the mind conceals. It's a line that we often would use in those workshops. And
say it again.
It's so true. The body reveals what the heart feels and what the mind conceals. The body is the first port of call. Yet we're so drowned by the noise here in our lives and in our world around us, internal noise, external noise and devices. And we're in such an always on, non-stop, noisy world that this overshadows and overpowers the subtle cues and signals that our body is trying to actually communicate with us. And we miss that. And it's such a tragedy, because when we learn to be in our body more, we have so much access to so much other wisdom, perspectives, as even Richard Schwartz in his IFS model, a lot of it is also working on the body level, to locate the parts in the body and to access them and to integrate them and to have that wholeness. And it's really, I think that's probably one of the most important things that we have to, that we would value, be so enriched and have so much value from today, is learning how to drop into our body, learning how to drop out of our head and into our body. EQ's been a focus for a while now, emotional intelligence, but body work has been very neglected. And that seems to be where it's all at now. Body keeps the score. It's now really kind of, we have to just inhabit the temple of our being, which is our body.
Yeah, it's also the amazing amount of intelligence and information that comes through there, and it has an untainted quality once we learn to access it.
It's that first signal of, before it's filtered through the mind and all the belief systems and conditioning and judgments, and absolutely.
Yeah, it's been one of the beautiful gifts of the retreats for me, has been a space where I can refine my intuition. And if I have a feeling, do I what does it mean? And do I follow it? Sometimes it's information that's information, but I'm not meant to share that information right away. I'm meant to build to that information with someone else.
Find the right time where you bring it in. Yeah.
And finding finding moments where a voice can lead me in the wrong direction, And what I found is I was having some conversations over the weekend with one of the guys who's been at the retreat a couple times and was here again for the holiday, and he was asking me different questions about it, because he has an interest clearly in stepping into a facilitator role. And one of the things I thought about, but I didn't share with him, which I'll share now, is the importance of not having a desire with the information one way or the other, right? Like, to getting out of the way of...
So that it can flow. Wow, that's beautiful.
No, is this idea right? Like, I have to be okay with both opposites. Like, I have to be totally okay...
Not be pulled more to one.
I have to be totally okay with being wrong. I have to be totally okay with an idea I have that I think is good, or even I know is good, like letting that go. It's not the time to be shared, and maybe the moment will materialize and maybe it won't. And if it doesn't, to be completely okay, not sharing an idea or sharing a concept or saying something.
Otherwise you interrupt the process that, as a facilitator, your job is just to allow it to unfold rather than actually shape it and define it. And
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. But just how important it is to decouple desire from...
Yes.
Like our intuition, really, in order to access it, one of the I found is to really strip away desire as much as possible from the mix. So before I go into whether this is right or wrong, I have to be okay with both.
There's
opposite.
not an attachment.
Right. I'm not attached to this. I'm not attached to that. I actually got to one point on one retreat where I had a coin in my pocket, and when I thought to share something, I flipped the coin on whether I should or not. And really what I was doing, when I realized afterwards, the benefit of that was suspending the decision of whether or not I would say something, suspending the decision of whether or not I would step in, which meant that the desire was stripped. If it said yes, then I went in. If it said no, I didn't.
It was impulsive more. It would be driven, if it was driven by a strong desire, it would be more impulsive, kind of,
Yeah, once I leave it to a coin, then it means that the coin can say yes, the coin can say no.
You're opening it up to...
I'm opening it up to something that's beyond my desire, and then choosing to say that whichever one it lands on, I will follow that. So it's
kind of a little bit like the Goral, which Purim is associated with, which is the super rational, beyond your mind framework of Adelo Yada. It's the kind of like theme of Purim. And the lots that were cast, because the word Purim actually means, Pur is the lots that was actually cast by Haman. The actual festival is named after the Haman left that to... He actually was quite a Kabbalist. The sources explain that he knew that by tapping into the super rational realm and almost not being attached to find the date for his nefarious intentions, he'd have higher power.
Oh, interesting.
From that kind of like beyond, Keter, so to speak, what they call crown realm, and it's a deep concept that to really kind of, as you say, to create space, to not be attached on a mind sort of judgment, so that
mind, desire, all of those,
yeah.
I've shared something similar with people in recovery to say sometimes what I did is sometimes if I was really struggling with a decision, then I would agree to, let's say, go to my sponsor, go to someone else.
Give it some space
and say whatever decision they make, I'll follow.
You hand it over.
So as an example, at some point early recovery, I was struggling with the decision of whether to go home for the holidays and whether it was a better decision for me to go home or not. And it was so confusing for me. I wasn't able to tell which was coming from which. Obviously, there was some sense of guilt and obligation to go home. I felt like I had to.
Right.
On the other hand, there was some stress associated with it.
Right.
As there often is going home to family, parents, siblings, etc. And to really figure out what was coming from what was very difficult for me.
It was entangled a lot.
Yeah, it was very entangled. And it wasn't clear what is coming from a good side, what is coming from a bad side. So I went to someone. He wasn't my sponsor. I went to someone and I agreed that, hey, I didn't tell this to him.
Your stance, your frame.
Right. My frame was I'm going to lay out everything in front of him, and whatever he says, I'll be okay with. And what I found that was interesting in this particular instance, as I went through everything, his advice was not to go. So I didn't. But let's say I would have arrived at the same decision myself and I would have done that, not going. It wouldn't have had that same ego dissolution process there, where I went through a process. The process that I went through completely dissolved the ego from the decision, and then the decision I made was made without ego because I was totally comfortable with either decision. And had he said the other way, I would have gone home.
Wow.
Right. So I've kind of felt the same as flipping a coin. It does the same thing. It suspends our ego. It doesn't allow it to interact with the decision. And then the decision is made independent of our own.
That's beautiful.
Our own desires. But it takes a place to get to be willing to flip a coin on something or to be willing to ask someone and follow their...
Right. The trickiness in a facilitation space is that the ego gets automatically activated when you're in that role. So you facilitating a process for someone, you're the healer, you're it's hard when you then get activated by something that's happening, and it's something that seems so clear to you, but you also have to, and that's where the importance and the vital role of work and personal work to such a strong level is needed for a facilitator, is to be able to really manage that and to find ways like you are describing of creating that space and to submitting to really actually ensure that the ego gets as much as possible, that the ego isn't getting into the way.
No, it's filled with landmines. There is no question. It's like Mayor Collinson, who I do the retreats with, often says every level has its devil.
Right.
Right. And not his line, but he repeats it often, and it's true. It's that we get to a certain place, and then at that place we're confounded with a whole new set of challenges. And there's no question there's a lot that comes up in facilitation that's dangerous.
Yeah, there's a great book actually by one of the great transpersonal psychologists. Her name is Hilary Ramett. Really accessible, not a big and certainly not dense book to read. Well worth reading, called Pathways of the Soul. Amazing book around the journey of psychospiritual evolution, and very archetypal, but in a beautiful, very unique way. And she speaks a lot about the cycles in personal growth, and how you will have things revisited, even on more subtle levels, and you'll think, oh my God, I mean, I thought that was done, and here we go again and back, and has this even been worth it? And the drama that comes with that, and we spoke a little bit last night around the ego loves to create drama and criticism at, when we haven't reached this perfect supposed level of our inner work, and something crops up, and it delights in derailing us and setting off that drama, which then prevents the work from being done, because then we're not present and we get all caught up in all of that. But it's really something to be able to continuously work on our stuff that gets triggered as human beings, and always will, and that's the gift as well to work with. But just to make sure that we have the spaces to not ever delude ourselves that no matter how much work we've done on ourselves, that we don't need to always watch that tendency and do that work on ourselves even in the moment of facilitating and being in the healer position. It's really, there's a tendency sometimes to, one of the other famous transpersonal psychology founders, Ken Wilber, a lot more harder to read and dense, but he has this concept of, he calls it the pre-trance fallacy. So it's a type of bypassing, where basically he says there's 3 stages in the journey of psychospiritual evolution. The 3 stages are pre-personal, personal, and transpersonal. So pre-personal means that you haven't developed a sense of who you are in a healthy, what Jung called the whole process of individuation, lifelong in many cases, most cases. You fused, you enmeshed with appearance, your culture, your conditioning, your narratives that you've been grown up with and exposed to,
programmed with,
programmed, exactly, that's the other word. I was like, what other word besides conditioning would that's it, programmed with. And the personal stage is hard, lifelong hard work of getting to know ourselves and getting the defenses out the way and working through those and peeling away the layers and doing hard, difficult, deep work, facing our stuff, doing our shadow work. And it's very appealing and sexy to want to jump from the pre to the trance without the personal work. So what Wilber distinguishes is between a transpersonal experience, a transpersonal state, and a transpersonal stage of development. So what people often make the mistake of is they get incredible clarity and downloads, as it's often called, from a medicine journey, from a retreat of whatever other type sometimes. And if there isn't the context and the right facilitation in terms of the work and what the work is about, they can be misled to feel that they now have the answers, they're enlightened. Mm-hmm. And deluding themselves that this was not just, which it was, an induced transpersonal state of consciousness, they delude themselves into believing that they've now arrived at the transpersonal stage of development. And that obviously causes the fallacy, because you can't bypass and you can't just jump from the pre to the trans. It all because of the pre-trans fallacy. And you see that, I think.
So break down the 3 stages so I understand it better.
So pre-personal is where you just haven't started your work. And you're very limited in life. You too enmeshed with your family system or whatever it might be, and you have not developed a healthy self-actualization, sense of self-individuation, as Jung would call it. And sadly, some people stay there. And the personal stage is where most of us need to spend our life, which is really getting to know that lifelong journey of getting to know who we really are. The first mitzvah in the Torah to Avram and Sarah, leave your birthplace, your father's house, the land which you come from, smash all the idols that you worship in terms of your identity and who you think you have to be, and are so enslaved to, and discover the land which I will show you, the mystery. It can't be predetermined. Smash those idols. And so that's the personal stage, and that is none of us can avoid that. The timeless words, so incredibly chiseled by the sage. I think it was Rav Hillel. In Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, you don't have to finish the work,
but you're not free
but
to
you're not
avoid
free
it.
to absolve yourself from it.
Yes.
And that's life. And until Geula, and even after Geula, in the Messianic era, there'll also be elevations and work in a different way. Perhaps interesting to look at what that means and what that involves. But our life's about work, and we have to do the work. And woe to us if we neglect our own work, because not only do we suffer, but the ones most closest to us suffer. And very few human beings, very few, do enough of that personal work to such a level that they are truly enlightened and reach the transpersonal stage of development. Mm-hmm. What does happen a lot, especially today with all the access to transpersonal experience, which is important, that people are having, is people having these moments of incredible breakthroughs and clarity, but instead of understanding that that's just a transpersonal experience, a transpersonal state, not stage of development, which they've arrived at through work. It's a doorway, like Aldous Huxley speaks about in Doors of Perception, and it can be a tool if you then use the work, maybe at some point, eventually, to help you reach a more transpersonal stage of development. But the danger is where people conveniently, because then it takes away the need to have to do all that really hard, uncomfortable work, feel that the guru complex, they've arrived, and so they don't have to watch themselves as facilitators or as gurus or as leaders or in whatever capacity, rabbis. And all the dark stuff that can happen in that position of power and influence and intimacy that we see sadly happens in all contexts and quarters of spiritual leadership and deep healing work. If those healers are really not accountable to themselves and doing the work and supported maybe, and in the spaces where, creating the spaces where they are processing, doing their own work, supervision, whatever levels it might be, submitting to someone else beyond them, so they're not just locked into their own, show that they're running, is vital. And it's also a concern. It's a concern sometimes just in terms of the trends and the culture, in terms of how quickly people become facilitators and the pathways that they arrive at that point. Right. And there's a huge, spectrum of facilitators out there.
Right. So what is the caution specifically that you're making? Is it that people shouldn't become facilitators too fast, or when people become facilitators, they should be aware of the...
I think a bit of both. I think, again, like there's no time frames and formulas for how long the process should be, but just people to be very, very careful, because doing this kind of work is really opening people up in a way where a lot can happen, and they're so influential and vulnerable, and the way you facilitate can have such a massive impact, even well-meant things. That's why you're saying that the voice, and to listen to it, and should you, and you're going through so much, and you're putting so much in place to not let the ego, hijack that, because there's such a need to. You're dealing with lives, that you're dealing with really, it's not a small consideration. This is some of the most powerful, privileged, and humbling work, but it's the most utmost responsibility to if you're holding space for that, to really prioritize your own support, your own work, your own spaces where you can develop the even in the moment. So what you was speaking to just now a little bit earlier kind of brought to mind as well. We in that project in the bank, we would often speak about how as we would own, and we would process, and we would work through our own attachments as facilitators for depth. Meaning, this is a rollout project in the bank, and we're taking these people through this journey, and it often is life changing. It's like medicine without the medicine. It's like profound healing stuff. That I mean, tears, all parties, the participants, facilitators, common. And we also would recognize and own that we came in often with an agenda that we wanted there to be depth. And we were attached to depth. We want them to go deep. We want them to drop. We want them to, and usually they did. It was such a flawless design that it was pretty much foolproof. But in the one or two times where, for whatever reasons, the defenses were very high and they just weren't dropping, it was an amazing thing to work with. And
Notice how you pinned it on them.
Huh? Right. So that the moment the moment you set up the attention that it becomes actual, it's not that we're all part of this process together, and that humility, the ego gets in the way. So the ego gets activated quite easily as a facilitator, and that's you will learn so much about yourself to facilitate in any of this kind of work at whatever level and type. So I recommend it, for people who want to get involved in any capacity of facilitation in the right way and doing it, with integrity but it's so powerful in terms of how. And so we found that when we would discuss these aspects of what gets triggered in us, and we had the space as facilitators to hold those conversations and share courageously and work through that, it was helpful. It was some way of with our co-facilitators and with the broader facilitator team to just keep a tab on that. But it's an interesting concept in terms of a facilitator's attachment to what they are wanting to have happen or in the process, the group.
Right. Yeah, I can see how that can can sneak in.
Is it about me or is it about the group, including me, which I am part of? One of the lines we often used to use was the role of the task of the facilitator is to serve the group, ultimately. So whatever the agenda is, we talk about, we'd have the agenda in the beginning, we'd have the sort of layouts and the map, but we'd often say the map is not the territory. In other words, this is the kind of layout of how, generally these workshops, giving people just a sense of that, but we always, work with the unexpected in groups. Groups have a wisdom and a life of their own, and they're such powerful teachers. And ultimately, no facilitator's agenda should block where the group goes.
Right.
As the overriding role as a facilitator is you follow where the group's going and their culture, actually, and don't turn against them, because if you do turn against the group as a facilitator, often groups will whack you quite hard. They'll teach you. They will, you have to really meet them as well sometimes. So you can't just kind of go blazing, depth and if they're not ready for that, that needs to be worked with. And
how does that work in a corporate environment where people aren't signing up because they're dealing with something?
Right.
They're coming because their company
it's a program.
required them.
Correct. One of the interesting things about the large group one, which was natural in-text teams, was that it was more voluntary and there was an advantage there as well in terms of that. But yes, there is an interesting dynamic in that context where it's a rollout program and people are...
so it's someone involuntarily walking in and you're taking them deep.
Yes,
but
correct. And so... Right, it's a fascinating, it's like a kind of it's interesting because a close friend of mine and mentor in many ways is a remarkable man, Mark Kahn. He's the global head of Investec HR and organizational development. He wrote a book called Coaching on the Axis, and the principle is that if you're a coach in a business context, there's a dual access. Your client is not just the individual.
It's the company.
It's the company as well. They're paying you and hiring you and the complexity needed to hold both of those at the same time so that they don't compete with each other is immense. And he developed a whole framework of coaching, which is used in many business schools around the world. And he's a remarkable man and a genius and a really fun human being to be around with too. So really special friend. But that kind of comes to mind as well, because this is seen as this workshop is designed and seen as a dual track personal development and team development. So there's also the organizational, and I think that most of the time people were appreciative of the bank's investment in them to that level. It was really nice accommodation, 4 or 5 stars, around the country in beautiful locations. And realizing that the bank was giving them, taking 3 whole days of work, giving them really powerful tools that they can use in their life. And no one is forced in terms of like, so as in any process should be, there should never
Right.
be a forcing on the safety.
Right, they can be an observer if they choose
They
to,
can be an
yes.
observer, and they also, we used also Nancy Klein's thinking environment. I don't know if you know her framework methodology of 10 different principles around just creating a certain ecology and quality of thinking through a container of which she kind of has these 10 principles. And one of them, actually mentioned it yesterday, is the diversity of processing and learning styles, and how someone in a group may seem very quiet, but actually that doesn't mean anything in terms of how much work they're doing internally and processing of what they're experiencing and seeing and participating in some or other way and level. So there's room for people to really show up at whatever level of courage that they were willing and ready to. The amazing thing was that sometimes teams that we would least expect to really jump in just would surprise us, IT teams and finance teams and lawyers. And it was just like really, often the novelty of the experience and having such a profound experience like that facilitated so well and designed so well was really, people would
You don't
really,
do any of that work today, though.
I don't. A bit of a sad story. I was at such a height in my career trajectory, and I really found my space as a group facilitator. There was something about, to facilitate a group. It's not for everyone. It takes a certain amount of certain confidence and personality and mix of qualities but it really was a space that I was able to shine, and I just bring all the different aspects of who I am, and even my sound instruments. When we would do the mindfulness module, I would there was like a core structure, but then there was room for us as facilitators to really riff on that, which was just really beautiful. And when it came to the mindfulness module, I would bring along my toys, my singing bowls and hang drum and all the instruments, and provide that very unique type of sound bath journey experience, which is very new for many people in those workshops. And I was at a height in many ways. The training enabled me, that I was telling you about, this process-oriented psychology, enabled me to really be so confident as a facilitator. Not overconfident, but feel so resourced that I was comfortable doing any level in some ways, on top of all the other facilitation training and experience, and as a psychologist, clinical psychologist that I'd had, and in the healing workspaces as well. I felt really so comfortable to facilitate individual, couple, family, group. It's a really powerful system of methodology that if you get trained enough, and it was a whole year training process, you really are resourced. And then our economy just took a turn for the worst. It's just over 10 years since that happened, and I had actually decided to move to a part-time. I was there 4 years full-time, as I said earlier, and I didn't know that I was able to change to a part-time facilitator position when I found that out, and it was a rollout project, and there was a lot of work pipeline, and I was appreciated very strongly by the exec of the bank in terms of what a strong facilitator. My results were, and feedback forms were just consistently really, really high. And I made the decision to move to a part-time and to start my own company. And as I did that, like about 2 months later, things really got hectic on the economy side, and collapse started. And basically the bank pulled the plug on that whole project 2 months after I moved. It's been a 10-year process of being on my own, which has been a real roller coaster in many ways. Finding, where I go. I moved more into the psychotherapy private practice space, which I'd never really developed strongly because my focus was more on the corporates for many, many years. I was at that stage already in the corporate space for over 10 years. It's been quite a journey, staying the path. Many times came close to just giving up and trying to just find the first available full-time work, even if it was something that totally I wasn't engaged with. And my first position in the corporate space was actually in an assessment center for leadership, and I was assistant head of the assessment unit. It was interesting in the beginning, but it got very kind of unfulfilling. So a little bit of a trauma there of kind of considering work that would be unfulfilling, and it's been a very been a hard journey. But I've also gotten to know myself a lot in that journey and in that space. It's brought a lot of stress to my family, a lot of painful feelings about that in terms of just the instability side of that journey and process. But it really has, I think, starting your own enterprise and staying that path, really believing in it and trusting is I think, a process that, for me, is a journey that you get to know yourself as well as in facilitating, perhaps you could say, at a level that you wouldn't otherwise have access to.
Yeah, career and finances and all of that is a beautiful breeding ground for personal development and the work we need to do. It brings up some... there's actually a teaching from the Rebbe, quoting the Alter Rebbe, that he says that the reason for financial worry and stress in the world is as a way of purifying ourselves. And he compares it he says,
to the floodwaters of Noah.
Exactly. Mayim Rabim, that the floodwaters of Noah, today that energy still exists in the world in the form of financial stress, financial worry.
Right.
You know.
Right.
And what I find is that no one escapes it.
Yeah.
No one escapes financial stress and worry. Even those who are very, very financially well off, they're still dealing with...
There's still a struggle.
Yeah, whether it's of making payroll or starting a new business and funding
different
something.
Different level of concerns. Yeah.
But it's still concerns, meaning this domain is one where we're very preoccupied with. You know, for example, unlike getting oxygen or food, some of us worry about it more or less. It's not, you know, some of us obviously have to deal with that concern a lot. Right. Some of us have to deal with that period of our life. But for the most part, we're not consumed by that concern. But it seems like 100% of men, certainly, are deeply impacted by financial worry, financial stress, financial concerns, and everything around that, everything that surrounds financial, our financial obligations. You know.
Yeah, it's thinking of that teaching, that absolutely incredible teaching of the Alter Rebbe. He speaks about how the teva, which is the Hebrew word for ark, is the same word as word, teva, tevot, and he brings the beautiful teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, which is bo ala teva, which the deeper meaning. So, you know, Noah's command Hashem's command to come into the ark, an invitation, the sanctuary from the floodwaters, and it's kind of taking that to a deeper level of, you could actually understand it in two ways. It's either bo ala teva, come into the word, as in the words that you're saying, even if it's not the full, you know, whatever words it is, just be in them, really come into them, and really, you know, be present fully in those words. And another explanation, the one that Alter Rebbe kind of focuses on there, is coming to the words of prayer, of Torah, having been immersed in the stressful floodwaters and turbulence of financial and worldly concerns and all that it relates to, you have an advantage. It's like the Baal Tshuva that kind of comes from the darkness and then into the light, and it's just driven with so much more love and so much more passion to want to, you know, move away from the emptiness. The business person actually has an advantage over the one who sits and learns Torah the whole day long, because they are dafka out there, you know, swimming in the torrents and they're yearning so much for just connection and just for peace, and not only should they not feel, this is the kind of reassurance and comfort that the Alter Rebbe gives to business people who worried about how much their involvement in the world detracts from their spiritual service. Not only do the floodwaters not detract, but just as in the case of Noah's ark, the floodwaters were what raised the ark, which floated above the floodwaters. So too, the process of being in that stressful space and then coming into a sacred sanctuary with our whole hearts and into our words and into community, it's like we've got an even greater advantage. It raises the words and our experience and our connection to an even higher level.
Yeah, I saw a beautiful teaching of a student of Rav Nachman. I saw it over Rosh Hashanah, that, you know, when we're engaged in business, being that there is a law in Judaism for pretty much the way we operate business, we're actually practicing Torah. We're actually practicing halacha. So
you're bringing it down into the most physical. You're actually Yeah, not only
Right.
that.
We're not separated from it. We're
Yeah.
still learning. We're learning in that moment. And he said, through the process of it, as long as we engage as long as we start engaging in what is the correct way to do this. Am I doing this correctly or am I not doing it? How does halacha...
There's consciousness.
Right. So bringing that into our business affairs, then the business affair is an exercise in halacha.
Right. It's a beautiful... You remind me of a teaching in Pirkei Avot that troubled me for a long time. It just didn't fit with the level of punishment. And it's a Mishnah that says that a person is walking and learning. And then it says, I think it's Rav Yanai is the one who I think. And he interrupts his learning to say, how beautiful is this tree? It says, he incurs his life. It's like such a serious thing. It's like I couldn't sleep almost with it. I was like, what do you mean? Like he's taking in Hashem's beauty. He's being a true yid. He's a moida. He's like Moshe Rabbeinu by the bush turns. We spoke about it, such a beautiful moment of turning points in Jewish history and revelation. And he incurs his life. Until I heard a Hasidic teaching that was such a resolution. And in the classic Hasidic way of rereading it, he says what that means is a person is walking and he's learning Torah. He's in the Torah arc. And then he turns and he says, he interrupts. He makes that's the key word, mafsik. He makes a distinction. Hafsaka is like a hefsek is a break.
Right. Between nature and Torah.
That this is Torah, but this is not Torah. That's incurring his life.
All right.
It's just such a beautiful retake in that reading. Yeah.
I've seen it in one area. I reached out to a rabbi a couple of weeks ago asking him if he wanted to do a podcast with me on the topic, but he wasn't ready to. But one of the things I've noticed, I'll give you an example. So in my industry, I do business with a number of Muslims and Jews, right? The industry I'm in, cell phones primarily, it's very... it's like most of the people who came into the industry, it's a young industry, weren't super well educated, right? So you have a lot of Indians, you have Muslims, you have Jews, for the most part, within the business, and grew up working with them. And it was interesting to see how a lot of the Muslim people I've worked with were very, very specific about not taking interest, and just in their lives, they were very regimented about this. That it says in the Quran or in the Torah, whichever they're pulling it from, that interest is not allowed. And they're very, very, very specific on it, to the point that they often won't even take interest on a mortgage, on a home loan. And in Judaism, there are some allowances for it in the form of business. Heter iska and things like that. But like what I've seen in my world, and many, many, many examples of
not
this,
exactly like
just completely disregarded how interest is. It's not even a worry or a concern or a consideration, And I've gone into it in different examples. There was one case where someone asked me for a loan, and in order to give the loan, it was for a personal matter. In order to give the loan, I was borrowing money against an asset of mine. So it's a relatively low interest way of borrowing. You can borrow against, sometimes real estate or stocks or things like that. It's an easier way to borrow. So I had to borrow in order to loan. And I called the rabbi and I said, am I allowed to just pass through my costs? Right? Like I have small costs on the loan. Can I pass it through to the person I'm loaning the money? And he told me I can't. I can't. He's like, as part of the cost of the loan, you'll have to incur the costs for the loan. And if there's no business transaction on the other side. So it gave me a sensitivity to, and obviously I'm not saying halacha, right? Someone should talk to their rabbi about this.
Kind of goes back to what you were saying of submitting to someone beyond yourself, so the ego doesn't kind of get involved and actually not let you be conscious. And in a way, like to a rabbi, I'm saying like to us to actually really...
Yeah, and another person may call their rabbi, and the rabbi will give them a different answer. I recognize that there could be different opinions on the same thing, and it's important to have an individual relationship with an individual rabbi who understands you, your situation, the halacha, and positions it accordingly. So I'm far from sharing halacha on the subject at all. But what I'm saying is that the questions in this domain are plenty, and they're very serious. And I've seen the damage, I've seen the ramifications of it. Oftentimes we think halachas are arbitrary, or rules in the Torah are arbitrary. But interest is a very, very, very dangerous concept. It is. It creates a lot of problems. There's someone who said the only way he's seen people, like wealthy people, lose their money are the 3 L's: liquid, ladies, and leverage.
Wow.
So too much alcohol, too many women, or borrowing too much money.
A little bit like kiss or kas, or that statement.
Yes, yeah.
It was similar.
Right, it's kind of similar. So leverage is a very, it's very dangerous, and unsecured debt is very dangerous, and credit card debt is a huge.
It's like when you're in it, you realize the wisdom of the Torah in terms of having certain parameters that kind of protect.
Yes.
Yeah, you get to see it with the first, direct.
Yes, I've concluded that when there's 2 people engaged in a high interest loan, both people are insane on the conversation. Both people are actually insane on the conversation. The person calling is not thinking about the future and actually what this costs. Warren Buffett has a line. He says, the 8th wonder of the world is compound interest.
Wow.
Those who understand it earn it, and those who don't pay it. And in compound interest, it's...
Wow, what a line.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing. If you took out a calculator, just if anyone... Go
appreciate
online.
The scale.
Yeah, go online and put in like investment return. Just like an investment return calculator. And what it would take to take $10,000 at 10% a year for, just $10,000, put 10% a year for a number of times. And then instead of 10%, put 12%, then put 14, then put 16 and 18. And you think,
exponential.
Wow, it's just called exponential. You're building exponential. The numbers that'll come out on the page in front of your eyes are unbelievable. Like a good example of this is doubling a penny. Would you rather $10,000 or doubling a penny every day for 30 days?
Wow.
And I think the answer, if you double a penny every day for 30
it's
days,
like...
something like $2.5 million. I mean, it's not normal the speed at which this happens. So on the one hand, the person who's borrowing at high interest, unsecured, doesn't fully understand the scale of the trap he's walking into. And the person who's giving it is saying like, wow, for so little effort, I can get such a return. Why wouldn't I engage in this?
It's messed up on both sides.
It's messed up on both sides. Yeah, and that's why with interest, it's on both. The sin is on both sides of the equation, which means it's not like the sin, the wrong, as a way to punish us.
As a transaction that lacks
meaning it creates a problem in both people's world. It creates a problem in both people's worlds.
As a relational interaction is actually creating. Wow.
Yeah, and seeing some of the things I've seen in business, which I don't know that most people get access to.
Right.
To this.
That's what I was kind of sensing. Is like you've got such direct line
visibility.
Of sight.
Yes.
Yeah. Of what happens in these kinds of.
Yeah, and amongst high net worth individuals, the ease of borrowing money at high interest. It's a phone call.
Wow.
Hey, can I borrow $1 million? I'll pay you 2% a month, or something like that. Like, it's
somewhere along the line, people are getting exploited.
It's both on both sides, and to me, it's I don't know. That's why I wanted to speak to this rabbi. I thought to have this level of conversation where it's
Is he an expert in kind of like ethics on that side?
That's what he said. He said, I don't feel so comfortable. He's like, I'm a rabbinical expert. I don't feel so comfortable diving into the experts of interest. And I said, I don't know that we need to. I'm not looking to break down all the halachas. I'm looking at it in
From a broader.
I'm looking in the reverse, meaning I backed into the halachas around, let's say, promiscuity and sexuality from real world experience of the problems of it. I thought at first when I was reading these laws as a teenager, that someone was punishing me and saying, here, I like chocolate, and you tell me not to have chocolate. So let's make my life difficult. It's kafia. Like there's some sort of benefit in fasting and renting. And maybe there is, but what I've learned in the real world is that sexuality is an all-consuming obsession, and if we go too far with that, our lives get taken over. There's no more toys in the sandbox. Nothing else is interesting other than the next orgasm, and it's very, very, very dangerous. And so, meaning arriving at that and then looking back in the original text and saying, "Oh wow, there was such wisdom here."
Right, in the focusing of that energy. I mean, the Rebbe gives the metaphor of like, to people who feel that the Torah is so restrictive or the Jewish way of life is like it's just focused energy. If you take a laser which can cut diamonds, it's just like lights, but focused in such a level that it has such a power, and it's like the the parameters of, in some ways, it's like, for me, it's important to also appreciate the other side of how the structures are there to create growth and life. They're not there in and of themselves, but to create true healthy life. But to appreciate as well that's without that discipline and without that the parameters in a certain way, it's just like there's just so much risk and so much can go wrong and does go wrong.
Right.
When it's such a powerful force that you're talking about.
Right. And I would say I've arrived at a similar conclusion based on certain things I've seen around the ills of interest, right? How certain people a number of years ago, someone I knew got into like a mountain of problems. An old friend of mine, and when I sat down to review his numbers with him and through it, I was like, how did you do this? Like, how did you accomplish to dig something? Like, it seemed like you were only working with a shovel. How did you dig 1,000 feet? Like, how did you get this mountain on your head? And as I understood more and more, he was dealing in an arena with high interest. So when he called someone, he was insane, like I said, and the other person was insane, and they engaged in this transaction that had a recipe for disaster. Meaning, we're engaging in something unsustainable. If you think about, someone committing adultery, right? They're temporarily insane.
Right.
Right.
There's no way it can end good.
Yeah, there's no way this can go. And you're talking about the ramifications for this, for a moment, for a few moments of pleasure, like your kids' kids, their kids, like the impact of this event is huge, right? You're engaging in an unsustainable relationship.
It's like in recovery work, I often say to someone who I'm working with, I say, in addiction, we all think we're going to be the one who's going to just get it right. It's like, you don't have examples of, very few, if there are, of addicts who've really been able to sustain that. It's like, but yet, when you're in it, it's like,
right.
I can do this, I can manage this. It's just like,
and one of the things in step 2 that we talk about, right, is came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Right. And such an important word that all of us who engage in the healing path, especially through the 12 steps, have to reckon with, is that we were insane. That's why it's suggesting to us that there's something that can restore us to sanity.
Right.
And I would argue the same, that someone who's engaging in, let's say, an adulterous relationship, they are insane in the sense that this is unsustainable. Something is going to, there's a bomb that's going to explode today, in 20 years, in 30 years, in 40, something's going to explode. And the same is true when two people are engaging in an unsecured high interest transaction. There's an unsustainable quality to it. The best someone can say is that someone else is going to end up holding the bag.
Right.
Like, I'll get repaid, but someone else will deal with the full consequences of this. So, and what is high interest and what is low interest, right? So I'm not even... Right. Unsecured debt is a very, very dangerous game to play with, which is why the reason for that...
so fascinating that parallel of sexual energy and money and financial, how to fuck creative energy. We were speaking a little bit about it over the last few days, and just how they go hand in hand often.
The money energy and the sexual energy, and watching this, and then thinking about the teaching of Rav Nachman's student, which is how we got here, is that there's an opportunity to practice halacha when that phone call comes in. I'll give you an example. Is based on this sensitivity, which I didn't always have, but for whatever reason, I didn't get dragged into the world. More to do with my temperament than anything else. So I didn't get dragged into that world. I'm like a more conservative business guy, so in some ways afraid of my own shadow. So it was more, slowly growing in that way and not wanting to take too many risks. But seeing others, many others who've gotten caught up in this on both sides, and then thinking about this teaching, is there's an opportunity to bring that sensitivity into the business world. So a friend of mine, after I understood it's better, this particular friend who I mentioned, when he called for a high interest loan, there was no question I wasn't going to do it. For me, the alarm bells went off. He's in trouble. No one is calling for a high interest loan unless they're in trouble. Really, so I said I'd be happy to meet with you to discuss it. And when we sat down, I said, "Is everything okay?" And it didn't take long for him to break down crying, and we went into the numbers and things like that. And it was so out of whack. He had dug a 1,000-foot hole with, you would think a shovel, but he wasn't operating with shovel. He was operating with sticks of dynamite, high interest, debt, or just interest. Interest is a rule. And then so I think in going into this, and I guess at this point in time, having gone on this riff, it's probably not necessary to bring a rabbi onto the podcast. I just think that it's important that as Jews, we're sensitive about the values that we talk about.
Sure. And really live those, integrate.
Live those, yeah. And like, what does it mean? Why does it talk about interest as such a dangerous idea?
Get into it and really actually, be aware.
And then how many people have taken a loan to pay a tzedakah debt? And if you took that loan to pay a tzedakah debt because the reputation was attached to it or something else, which I've seen on more than one occasion, was there interest attached to that? And then what's good and what's bad, and who are you attaching to this? Yeah,
wow.
Like we have to really look at and understand these things. And again, I'm coming at it the way I come to from everything else. I'm coming to it from the real world damage of it, and then afterwards seeing it in the book and saying, "Wow, I go out the great wisdom that existed in the Torah when it spoke about the ills of interest." It has such harsh language around it. I believe the word for interest is very connected to snake.
Yes,
right, and the snake is the great evil in the Torah. And there are many. I think Rashi has very strong language around interest. And for whatever reason, there was a business allowance that was made, but it's very, very,
snake
very, very
is also
narrow.
connected with sexual energy too. Interesting. The snake is also connected with sexual energy as well. The snake.
In what way?
In different contexts, like with Chava, Adam and Chava, there's certain commentaries around that and just what it represents in terms of that impulse and drive, just as an energy. It's interesting because the Kundalini, which is also the flow of energy in our embodied sphere.
It's a serpentine energy.
It's a serpentine. Yeah, it's not flowing in the linear. It's flowing from the base chakra to the crown in an actual figure of eight, DNA-like in some ways. Interestingly, serpentine way. Yeah. So when we get that flow right, and channel that energy in the right way, then the Nachash becomes Mashiach, because it's the same gematria actually. It's exactly the same gematria, Nachash and Mashiach. And there's fascinating Kabbalistic teachings by the Alter Rebbe, actually, in a fascinating discourse of his around the episode of the snake biting the Jewish people, and the very strange, bizarre Hashem telling Moshe to raise a serpent on the pole, which would be the source of healing, and that became the symbol of the medical Caduceus, I think it's called, and just the Kabbalistic aspects around that, and the source of it is actually really all from Hashem, the negativity, the death, the ego aspects, and to work with that and appreciate that and transform that.
Right.
Yeah. Such an opportunity, as you say, but beautiful how you came to these, the appreciation of the wisdom of the Torah through your direct experience. It's a beautiful way to come to that. There's a
Yeah, and I hope more people go on to talk about it and discuss it, because for whatever reason we become very lax in the culture about it. And the parallel, what I've seen, like I said, with people I do business with in the Muslim community who are so particular. And I recognize that there aren't allowances within their religion that exist within Judaism, but there's no question to me that we've taken a small allowance and blown it so far beyond what the original intent was, that we're back to where we started.
Such an interesting thing to know, something I had no concept about. In terms
I don't think that most people understand the. It's. I think it's one of the underbellies that are existing. One of the undercurrents that are existing in.
Not being addressed by the leadership or just.
I don't know that many people are that aware of it. I don't know that many people are that aware of it, but I can tell you it's systemic.
Wow.
It's 100% systemic. And then again, going back to teaching of Rav Nachman, where the opportunity, and this is not to judge anyone or shame anyone. Like I said with myself, I was spared entry into it only by my temperament, not by the knowledge of the danger or anything else. I very easily could have got sucked very deep.
Quite amazing how that's unfolded in that way.
Into that world. And then, later on, sitting with investment advisors and then showing me this calculator that I mentioned, Warren Buffett talks about compound interest and what it can do. And it's mind-blowing ability to build wealth or to destroy wealth, So seeing how that...
Was there a moment of appreciation for your journey, as painful and traumatic as it was, that in some way there was a gift of it in that in that way of was that at the same time as the recovery journey, or
Which specific?
in terms of, like you said something around temperament, more from a temperament, not from a process point of view, in terms of your experiences in life that you were kind of holding back in terms of fear of your shadow. Was there anything?
I was saying just in business, I've been very conservative, but I've also had a lot of challenges in business, not because of those reasons, but I've had other challenges in business, very, very significant, which I think, also very connected to what I shared earlier about the teaching of the Rebbe and the Alter Rebbe about, money and finances and career, how that brings a lot of opportunity for much deeper development. And some of the the deepest development work I've done, I think, as an adult, there was like the abuse, the addiction, but actually a lot of it was around things that came up in my career, and recognizing that I need to figure certain things out, and in figuring those things out, I figured parts of myself out.
Wow.
I'd say in some ways the most challenging portions of my adult journey have actually been financial stress, financial worry, and dealing with those challenges in my life. And the lessons learned from it have, I think, been some of the growth I'm certainly more proud of.
Wow.
As I sit here.
It's kind of, we were talking a little bit about the two domains, the main domains of kind of measuring how healthy a psyche is the healthy expression of their energy into at least one of, ideally both of, the two domains of social relationships and work, and expressing their energy healthily and their impact in the world and in what they do in their work domain.
You had mentioned this. I hadn't heard it before, but about Sigmund Freud's definition.
So Freud, one of the things that Freud got a lot wrong and was very limited, and Jung in many ways went so much further and so much broader, and Freud was very stuck on the individual domain only, and not the more systemic and broader and spiritual and archetypal, and also the sexual was just very, very much kind of narrowly stuck in just in that space. But one of the things he really nailed and got so right was his talking of the need of the libidinal energy of the psyche, and which is really, this energy of expression, sexual energy, who we are and how we express ourselves in the world,
creative expression,
sorry, and how the measures of on a psyche level of whether a person is healthy is that he called it, I think in the German, Arbeit and Liebe, work and love. It's really, those are the two spaces where we are meant to express in a healthy, creative way our energy. And I was saying that what's fascinating is that, what actually constitutes a clinical diagnosis and disorder. We all go through times of depression, bouts of anxiety, and addictive aspects and habits that we get stuck in, obsess about things. But what really, constitutes a clinical depressive disorder or anxiety disorder, obsessive disorder, or delusional disorder? We may be delusional at times, insane at times, and really the two aspects are so fascinating. Number one, it all comes down to a cognitive rigidity. So any of these disorders are where we are stuck in a depressed way of thinking, or anxious, or obsessive, or addictive, and we can't break that. And so again, circling back to what we were speaking about, the need to drop out of our mind and into our body. And traditional psychotherapy, inside talk-based therapies, is just so limited, because the problem is in the mind, and you staying within there, you've got to get out of it. You've got to really be working on the somatic and the body levels. One of the other reasons why social interaction is so valuable, because any social interaction with someone else and having a deep, meaningful, authentic conversation, I am sharing, and I'm not stuck in my own self-referential and reinforced system. I'm actually having my ideas tested out by someone else and how they see the world. Right. So it actually is mind-opening in some ways, just like getting into the body, ceremonial work, those modalities and journeys would be in a different way, but it still is.
Right, I mean, a conversation which is a true conversation, which is
right.
Not speaking at someone,
but really having that
ideas.
interaction and exchange of ideas is really
a mind-opening.
It's really a mind-opening experience. So the other aspect in terms of what constitutes a diagnosis of a psychological, psychiatric disorder, psychopathology, is going back to this Freud thing of these two measures of the domains of a person's life and healthy creative expression in those two areas, is that the affecting of functioning, the breakdown of a person being so stuck in that way of thinking, is to a level that their functioning is impacted, and in the two domains that they identify are social relationships and work, occupational.
Oh, got it.
So,
Right, for both
so
of
the
us.
backflip of what constitutes a healthy expression of a psyche, where a person is managing that flow of energy in a conscious, focused, healthy way in both those domains of their relationships and their work. The flip side of that is someone who's really disturbed and disordered and really mentally unwell is someone that has blockages in one, or especially if both of those areas are blocked.
Yeah, and I guess to take that thread even further, we're saying that there's a deep connection between the human psyche and the health of the human psyche and those two aspects of our life. So being that both of those have infinite capacity for growth, right? Both our relationships and our career and work, both in fulfillment and abundance and all aspects that it provides. As if we want to go further into that, we're challenging ourselves personally. We're challenging personal growth. So not necessarily on a scale of disorder versus not a disorder, but let's say to get even healthier.
Yes. Right? Yes. It's the paradox of kind of like being more focused and intentional in how we show up in those domains. And therefore being able to manage ourselves and put parameters and discern and use consciousness and hold back where needed, that actually brings more abundance. That actually it's the just incredible paradox of how focus and parameters, direction, values, sacredness is actually what brings true abundance.
Right. One of the occupational hazards of self-work, personal development, psychedelics, all of this, whether 12 steps, I've seen it across the board. It's my own experience. For more, it played out more in the 12 steps than in psychedelics because I already worked through it, is believing that now that we're finding all this purpose and fulfillment in that space, that the work and career are less valuable.
Should take less of a...
Yeah, so... in my case...
It can become a substitution in some cases.
Right, in my case, I kept trying to sell my business. I was like, okay, I want to be done with it because this has so much more fulfillment. And at some point in time, I got the message. It's like, no, I'm meant to be in this.
Don't check out of that.
Yeah, don't check out. There's so much...
That's the arena where...
Yeah, there's so much goodness and gold, to be sober in a meeting is easy. To be sober-minded in a business meeting, right, when there's real stakes, that's a completely different animal. And that's where it's actually meaningful. And I feel like that's why that teaching of the Rav Nachman student made such an impression on me, is that when you take it from, we always say like, oh, this Yisachar Zvul and Yisachar Zvul, one is learning and one is business. And I don't know that we can divide it so evenly. If we're trying to understand what the prescription is for doing business from a Jewish perspective, and we're continuously engaged in that, then I'm learning as much as the guy who's building a sukkah.
More experiential.
It's experiential learning. Right. It's like, what do we do here? What do we do here? And then try to practice it. Try to practice it when the stakes are real high, right? When someone's business is on the line and their only way out of it is high interest debt, for example, but that's against,
Right. How do you act at that point in that system and context? And that's the ultimate litmus test. I mean, not only are those crucial domains of our lives so important and valuable to not check out from, but actually that's the real litmus test.
That is the work, right?
Actually, where I often say that the Ten Commandments, two sides, two halves. The one is the spiritual, and the one is the interpersonal. And the true test of spirituality does it filter down to those nuanced interactions on the day-to-day level with people in the spiritual person's life. The greatest, for me, the biggest test of how holy a person is watching them, how they interact with their wife and kids. That tells me more of where a person's holding spiritually and how holy they are than anything else. That's where that's where it's grounded. That's where it's like Dira B'Tachtonim, that dwelling place in the lowest realms, which the whole of Torah, especially through the Hasidic and Chabad sort of philosophy framework, is articulated as really creating that grounded, bringing the divine to the lowest most levels and integrating it all the way, which Yaakov as well was the integrator, Yud Akev, the highest letter representing Hashem's name and the first of Hashem's essential name, and Akev, the heel, just bringing it all down and really having that that integration. That is, and that always starts, this principle of microcosmic and macrocosmic redemption is for me just it's so vital. It's like we bring redemption outside when we do our own work, and we bring the divine into our own sanctuary of our family, and first and foremost into our own body and being, and live that. And it's embodied. It's not just in Kabbalah, the symbol for exile is the on the micro level, on the human being, as we are all called a miniature world, microcosmic world, is the throat. The throat is the Meitzar Hagaron, it's this Mitzrayim, where there is a blockage, and the ideas and what we espouse and the values and speak about doesn't connect with and flow and integrate down into the heart, and from there it's pumped into the rest of the body, and you feel it, you live it, and that's the Mitzrayim in a person, and it's such a fundamental truth and principle, working with dropping down into really living what we learn and speak about, and teach and espouse and sign up to, and the isms. It really is. That's the ultimate test, and that is. It's such a fundamental thing. So I think if we can really start to live personally in that level, if we can really kind of bring it down to the most real place, and it's something that we really feel connected to. That's what we say from the Torah, from Devarim, but it's at the end of every prayer service, whether it's Yom Kippur, which we're going to have in a few days, or a weekday, we end with Aleinu. And it says there from Devarim, from Deuteronomy, V'yadata hayom, you shall know today. Also interesting that hayom is about presence and in the moment and being in the now, in this authentic space. But dat, knowledge, is always connection, because the Torah uses dat as it is the connecting, integrating of the first triad of intellectual faculties. The Torah uses to describe sexual connection, Adam yada et chava. So dat is always the connector between the head and the heart. So the verse says, V'yodata hayom, when you're in the moment and in the present, and you have clarity and awareness, don't let that experience dissipate. Contain it and integrate it. Bring it down into your heart. It's got to come down there. And that's, once you make that sort of, sometimes the biggest distance in the universe. It can feel like, and it is. It's a fascinating story between the fifth Chabad Rebbe and the Freud on that whole discussion about that. But and the need to make those connections. But once we do that, then that is really, we ground that and we live that, and it becomes something which is really creating that home for the divine, filtering down to every level in ourselves, and then we can take that outwards into our relationships, into our work. It really is that inside-out process.
Beautiful. Yeah. So let's tie it all together. We spoke about many things. Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah. Well, maybe Malchut is a good... this is a time of Malchut. Rosh Hashanah is it's the carving. It's a coronation of God, and what does that mean? It's so important to understand that. And in many ways, Malchut is such a deep and fascinating sphere of it's the sacred feminine again, but it's the space of receiving, of holding, of the moon that has no light of its own, like the Jewish people in the relationship with Hashem are considered that holder. But it also means carving out space, making space for other. It means Malchut is about humility. It's the silent aspect, although it's also associated with expression and speech. Again, that paradox. But Malchut is really, it's service, it's connection, it's giving of myself beyond myself to hold space for another. First and foremost, the divine in my life, and then the other expressions of divine in my life, the people that I am enriched by and can be enriched by every day, every moment, because every human being can enrich us at every moment. And so Rosh Hashanah is where we carve out that space to really be present and to really allow space for the other. And in that way, we emulate God. We were speaking about the Ramak, Tomer Devorah, a lot over the Yontif. There's a special Sefer Torah that we have in your shul it was written in honor of the Ramak.
Yes.
And he speaks as well about imitating the divine. But one of the ways we do that on a very fundamental level is, it speaks in Tanya, and it's beautiful, 3 chapters of chapter 46 to 49 in the first part. But it's this incredible concept of if God, the omnipotent, the infinite could make space for us, to want us to enter into relationship with him, her, it, then we can do the same and make space for the other divine souls in our lives. If God, the King of Kings, and like had no need and perfect, and Rosh Hashanah, I think that's accepting the yoke of heaven, that's carving out the relationship, that calling out with the shofar, and it is a calling out in a relationship. It's the word trua, which is one of the names of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Trua, is also from the word, I mentioned it, friendship, reim, like the bride and groom and under the chuppah, reim ha'ahovim, beloved friends. And the call of the shofar is that awakening to the beauty of when we show up authentically in relationship. And for me, that's really what kind of we've been speaking about, is how do we show up authentically with each other, holding space for each other, if it's a capacity as a facilitator, if it's a capacity as a friend. There's so much beauty that we can bring into our lives and live in that more godly flow of the divine light if we hold that and we really just hold our heart in every interaction that we have.
Right. I guess that was a theme that was throughout. You went to facilitation, the removal of the ego.
The mind, ego traps.
Right. Within business decisions, the removal of the desire, the ego, the greed, and all of that, and relegating to a higher authority, to a different way. Right. All of that.
So things can flow more.
Yes, exactly.
More authentically and beautifully.
Yes. Make a lot more space.
Yeah. And then magic
within
happens.
ourselves.
then the magic of the creep will show itself. It will.
Yes.
As long as the conditions are right, it will.
Oh.
Thank you so much for the opportunity
Thank you,
to be here
It's a
again.
beautiful opportunity to sit and talk again, and this time from a space of being a friend.
Thank you.
As well.
It's been so special.
You were a stranger at some point.
Spend time, such quality and special.
Thank you, Yochi.
Time with you. Thank you so much.